Hello, English 102 students. This is Professor Koch. I am making a video to go over the things that I would go over if we were together in a classroom today or tomorrow about the sample paper that I asked you to read. If you haven't had a chance yet to read the sample paper that I posted under content for the long research paper, please pause this video and read it now and pay attention to the strengths and weaknesses, particularly in organization and in source use. If you are ready to watch the video with my feedback, I wanted to point out, first of all, that this is a really strong paper. This is a successful paper for English 102. In this annotated version that I have here, I've gone through and highlighted the writer's use of sources. I want to point out, by the way, that Lisa Smith is not the writer's real name. I do have her permission to use the paper, but I changed her name. So let's pretend her name is Lisa. I highlighted Lisa's use of paraphrase and summary in blue, and I highlighted her use of quotation in yellow, and I underlined her lead-ins to the quotation and paraphrase. So if we were to scan through this paper, you'll see a lot of blue. In other words, a lot of places where she's paraphrasing or summarizing her research. This is great because it allows her voice to be the strong voice in the paper instead of relying too heavily on somebody else's words. So on this page, what page are we on? Page 4, she has a little more quotation than in other pages, but she still balances it nicely. Again, look at this balance when she's using research of quotation to paraphrase. So you can see that she's doing a really good job of making research a big part of this paper, but not over-relying on quotation. She's also not plagiarizing. She is making sure that every time she uses somebody else's words, she puts quotation marks around those words. And she's always careful to give credit to her sources, whether she's quoting, paraphrasing, or summarizing them. Another thing I wanted to point out in the way that she uses sources is her lead-ins to quotations. She always does a good job with quotation sandwiches, introducing the quotation in her own words. And notice how she does this in a way that accentuates the strength of her sources. She makes her sources look really credible, so the reader is prepared for something good. So things like, according to an article published in the Center for Economic and Policy Research, or one such study published in the Journal of Health Economics. Notice how she's foregrounding how great these sources sound. In other places, instead of calling attention to the title of the publication, she calls attention to the author's credentials, such as here when she says, Francine Blau and Lawrence Kahn, economists at Cornell University. So we know why we should be paying careful attention to what it is that they have to say. All of that is really good. Notice too that she tends to follow up on all of her research with her own return sentence at the end of paragraphs to help us see why all of this research is significant. She helps tie everything together by finishing the quotation sandwich. Now, one of the most important parts of your research paper is your works cited list. And here is a really nicely formatted works cited list. She's got all the brown M&Ms at work here. It's double spaced. The sources are in alphabetical order. Hanging indent is used. And this makes it really easy for readers to find her sources on her works cited list. As some of you noticed in your discussion post, she tends to have really excellent sources. Most of her sources are scholarly sources. She has a total of 12 sources. I guess 6 of them are scholarly journal articles. Notice how she follows the rules of MLA format. A lot of the times they seem really, really tedious, but they help me to see different kinds of sources. So because she's done this correctly, I can tell this is a scholarly journal article. And here I can tell that this is a website from, it looks like some sort of online magazine or website. So those brown M&Ms actually end up mattering. And here, whenever she has a source that she located from one search, she tells us so. This is important for you because you need to have a certain number of sources from one search, and you need to be able to tell us that on your works cited list so you get a passing grade on your paper. So all of that stuff is really good. I'm going to leave this here so you can take a look more carefully on your own if you'd like at all the good things that she does in her works cited list. Couple other technical things about how she uses sources. I'm sorry if all this scrolling is making you dizzy. Here's an example of how to cite a source that doesn't have a title or an author. She instead cites the title of the article. So when you go to her works cited list, it's easy to find that citation, the in-text citation matching the first element of the works cited lists citation. A couple other things that I want to show you is how she uses a quotation inside of a source. So you know how sometimes your sources will cite really excellent research and you want to use that. In this case, she's got this source by Aitken et al. And Aitken cites all these people that the writer wants to use. So she must indicate both who said it, but also where she found it, quoted in, because Aitken is on her works cited list. Aitken is the author, whereas these people will not be on the works cited list. So that quoted in abbreviation is what you use to indicate that the source of your quotation was quoted in the source that's on your works cited list. One other, I think this is my last other detail. There are a couple of places where this writer shows us that she is citing multiple sources for the same bit of information. This is different from this citation. Here it's a citation by of one source by two authors, so she uses the word and. But look at this one. This one cites Conham et al., page 26, and then there's a semicolon with the name Baker and Milligan. This means that both of these separate sources gave her research about longer maternity leave linking to reduced asthma diagnoses. So this shows us that the information is credible if she can find it in two different places, but it also shows us how much she's paying attention as a researcher if she's noticing multiple sources making that point. So that's another technique that you can use. We've talked about putting sources in conversation, and this is one way to do that. This isn't everything that's wonderful about her source use, but I wanted to point out some of the features that make her source use strong and also technically correct in terms of MLA form. And now I want to talk about the content and structure of this sample paper. And what I have here is a little outline for you that just basically points out the purpose of each paragraph in the essay. The essay is 11 paragraphs long. In her intro, she gives us her conclusion, in her intro, she gives us her thesis statement, as well as all the background that we need to know about FMLA. In the first half of her paper, part 1, she talks about the problems with FMLA. In the second part, she talks about the benefits of having a longer paid leave as a solution to those problems. So she's doing a pretty classic research paper here, problem, solution. What she also does, though, in the middle is a transition paragraph that moves from the problem part of the paper to the solution part of the paper. This format won't work for all of your topics. But if you're doing a problem solution paper where you're identifying a problem and offering a solution, it might work for you. Notice how this outline captures the main point in every paragraph. Some of you already noticed how focused each paragraph is and how each one proves a single point that relates to her thesis. So I'm going to scroll back up to the beginning of the paper so we can look at a couple of those things in a little more detail. First of all, again, her introduction does a very good job of establishing the background that we need to understand her concerns. Don't forget about that. You've been researching a lot, and you might need to step back from your paper a little bit and think about the kind of background your readers will need to understand your topic. I also like the way that she tells us about the people who are involved in this debate, the stakeholders here, and who agrees on this. Okay, so she's establishing the background. She establishes the problem right here, and she's giving her thesis, which is how we will solve the problem. Okay, she does a really good job of establishing her topic sentences early in the paragraphs. You don't need to put a topic sentence early in the paragraph. In her case, though, it really helps the reader to stay focused. So her first problem is about the fact that FMLA doesn't apply to all women, and she provides plenty of support for that. Notice, too, that she follows up at the end with a return sentence, going back to her thesis. Undoubtedly, we need a change. This is a really nice transition here. This results in an unequal opportunity, and this leads her into that second point that she wants to make, the second problem with FMLA. And here is her third problem. And notice a really basic transition here. Another problem is. There's nothing too fancy about that, but it gets the job done and it helps us follow her train of thought. Again, she has a return sentence at the end and links these problems with why we need to change our policies. Here's another good transition. Not only do these problems exist, but the benefits will affect the mother, infant, and the economy. This is her transition paragraph that I referred to earlier. She is using this paragraph to wrap up the problems that she mentioned and to move the reader forward into the solution that she's about to propose. So a longer paid maternity leave's first benefit is improved health. And that's the effect on the mother, right? She has a return sentence here, and then she moves on to the infant. First, lower mortality rates, and then the next benefit to the infant, general health is improved. Notice this nice transition. The extent of the benefits does not end there. A really smart transition. I also wanted to point out where she's using a naysayer here. This is her first naysayer, I think, where she acknowledges that some might object to the benefits of breastfeeding. But she points out that the American Academy of Pediatrics still supports it. We'll talk about naysayers again in a minute. This is the last benefit that she's going to cover. And here she gets into a naysayer again. Remember how important it is to acknowledge other viewpoints. It shows that you've done the research. It shows that your position is well considered and informed. So here she acknowledges what some say, why they would oppose it, and notice how she addresses it. In this case, she kind of agrees. This might be the case, but, and she goes on to return to her point, there'll be these previously mentioned benefits. Here is another transition into yet another naysayer, the concern about the cost to taxpayers. She does agree. Inevitably, that cost would be dispersed, and notice how she addresses it. However, this may be reduced. These other costs may be reduced. So notice she does a good job of acknowledging the concerns of these naysayers. Here again is another one. And this is this idea of having healthier communities of moms and babies really appeals to a lot of readers, so she's doing a good job with that. Notice how in her conclusion, she returns to her thesis statement. But she doesn't simply repeat her introduction. She states it here, and it takes 2 sentences. It's a complex thesis statement. And she says it more specifically and more forcefully than she did in her introduction, so it's a good, strong way to end her paper. So those are just some of the things. We didn't cover everything, but those are some of the things that I think she does really well in this paper. I know you've noticed some others as well. Feel free to continue our discussion over on the discussion board if you wanted to ask any questions about this paper, or if you wanted to keep our observations going about what makes the paper work so well. Thanks for being here. I hope your research is going well, and I'll talk to you soon.